The rhythm of the river. In the coastal barrio of San Antonio, life was dictated by the river. It was a massive, serpentine body of water that wound its way down from the jagged peaks of the mountains, cutting deep through the heart of the jungle before emptying into the turquoise sea. The river gave life to the village. It provided silver fish for the tables, cool water for the crops, and a place for the children to splash away the heavy afternoon heat. But the elders always warned that the river was not a gift. It was a lease. Every year, as the heavy monsoon rains arrived and the water turned from clear crystal to a dark, churning brown, a heavy silence would fall over the older fishermen. They knew the ancient laws of the western Visayas. They knew that the deep pools beneath the limestone cliffs belonged to the Kataw, the powerful predatory water spirits that ruled the currents. "The river takes what it gives," old Mang Chelso would mutter, checking the sturdy knots on his wooden banka boat. When the water whispers your name, you don't look and you don't follow. Most of the younger generation laughed at the old stories, viewing them as nothing more than fairy tales told to scare children away from the dangerous currents. Among the skeptics was a young, ambitious fisherman named Danilo. Strong-willed and fearless, Danilo cared little for old superstitions. He cared only for the size of his daily catch. The dry season had been brutal, leaving the river unusually shallow, but as the first storms of June rolled in, the water levels swelled rapidly. With the rising tide came a bizarre, intoxicating phenomenon that began to drift across the water at twilight. It started as a low, melodic humming. It didn't sound like any bird or wind through the reeds. It was a voice, breathtakingly beautiful, rich, and liquid. It carried a melody that felt ancient, pulling at the chest of anyone who heard it, filling them with a sudden, overwhelming urge to step closer to the water's edge. One evening, Danilo was out later than usual, anchoring his small boat near the deepest bend of the river, where the current carved into a massive wall of black volcanic rock. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky in a bruised twilight of deep violet and grey. Suddenly, the water around his boat went perfectly still. The rippling currents flattened like sheets of glass. From the dark shadow of the black rock wall, a figure broke the surface. Danilo's breath caught in his throat. It was a woman, but her beauty was sharp, dangerous, and otherworldly. Her skin possessed a faint, pearlescent glow, and her hair was the color of deep sea moss, swirling around her shoulders like silk. Her eyes were wide, completely black, and filled with a cold, mesmerizing intelligence. As she leaned against the rock, Danilo noticed the subtle, glistening scales lining her collarbone and the faint, webbed structure between her long fingers. She opened her mouth, and the hypnotic melody poured out, vibrating right through the wooden hull of his boat. Danilo felt his hands grip the edge of the canoe, his mind clouding as he prepared to dive in. Within days of the encounter, the river began to demand its annual tribute. It was a pattern the elders recognized with dread. The Kataw was hunting, and she required a life to pay the river's debt. First, a seasoned diver named Lando went missing while clearing a tangled net from the underwater roots of a massive banyan tree. When his body was recovered 2 days later, his lungs were completely free of water, and his face held an expression of pure, blissful ecstasy. He hadn't struggled. He had simply let himself be taken by the depths. But one soul was never enough to satisfy the hunger of the water spirits. The song grew louder each night, echoing through the barrio, calling to the restless and the weak-willed. On a stormy Friday night, the horror struck Danilo's own household. His younger brother, a gentle teenager named Nico, woke up in a trance-like state, his eyes glassy and unblinking as the distant melody drifted through the slatted bamboo walls of their hut. Before anyone could stop him, Nico walked out into the pouring rain, drawn toward the roaring river like iron to a magnet. By the time Danilo realized his brother's bed was empty, it was too late. Danilo raced down to the muddy bank with his flashlight, the beam cutting through the torrential downpour. He caught a final, devastating glimpse of Nico stepping off the ledge into the deepest pool of the river. Beside his brother, breaking the surface with a triumphant, twisted smile, was the Kataw. Her powerful, iridescent green tail lashed the water, creating a violent whirlpool that dragged Nico down into the black abyss before Danilo could even dive into the current. Grief-stricken and consumed by a burning desire for vengeance, Danilo refused to let the river keep his brother. He went to Mang Celso, demanding to know how to fight a creature born of the water. "You cannot fight her in her domain," Celso warned, handing Danilo a rusted iron spear tip and a heavy pouch of crushed, sun-dried tobacco leaves and wild ginger. "Iron burns their magic, and the bitter oils of the earth blind their senses. Trap her where the water cannot protect her." That night, Danilo took his boat back to the black rock wall. He tied a heavy rope to a stout tree on the bank, dangling the iron spear tip just above the water as bait. He hid in the thick ferns along the muddy shore, his hands clutching a large jar filled with the potent tobacco and ginger mixture. Around midnight, the water began to boil. The Kataw emerged, her black eyes locked onto the gleaming iron tip dangling above her pool. She hissed, a sound like a spitting cobra, sensing the foul magic of the metal. She reached up with her webbed hands to tear the line down. Danilo didn't hesitate. He launched himself from the bank, landing heavily on the shallow ledge right above her. Before the creature could dive back into the depths, he threw the entire contents of the jar directly into her face and gills. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The bitter tobacco oils and burning ginger seethed against the creature's delicate underwater respiratory system. She let out a horrific, gurgling shriek that sounded like rushing water tearing through stone. Blinded and gasping for oxygen, the Kataw thrashed wildly, accidentally wrapping herself in the heavy rope Danilo had positioned. Danilo grabbed the iron spear, plunging the heavy metal tip directly into the shallow water near her tail. The moment the iron pierced her scales, a bright, scalding steam erupted from the wound. The creature's magical illusion shattered, her flawless, beautiful face contorted into a hideous, amphibious visage with rows of needle-like fangs and pale, leathery skin. With a final, desperate surge of strength, the monster snapped the rope, rolling her heavy, scaled body backward into the dark depths of the pool, leaving behind a trail of thick, glowing blue blood that hissed against the riverbank. As her blood dissolved into the current, a strange calmness washed over the river. The violent, muddy whirlpools flattened out, and the oppressive, hypnotic humming that had plagued the barrio for weeks vanished entirely, replaced by the natural, gentle lap of the water. The men of the village arrived at dawn, finding Danilo shivering on the bank. Just a few feet downstream, washed up gently on a bed of river reeds, was the body of young Nico. The river had finally returned what it had stolen. Nico was laid to rest in the village cemetery, far away from the sound of the currents. Danilo never fished in the deep pools of the river again. He moved his boat to the open sea, where the water was vast and free from the ancient curses of the mountains. The Black Rock Wall remained a forbidden zone for the people of San Antonio. Today, the children are still taught to respect the water, and the elders still watch the currents with cautious eyes whenever the monsoon rains begin to fall. And if you ever find yourself sitting by a river in the Visayas at twilight, and you hear a beautiful, solitary voice singing from the shadows of the rocks, look away, because the river is always looking for a way to settle its score. Please subscribe and like and share the video to support the channel. Thank you.